we never want to forget that we have a gigantic inheritance from the centuries before, and that we take for granted up until the moment someone points out that this is it. That Thomas Aquinas, for example, is right here present in the way you think without knowing it. Hello and welcome back to If That Works. Today we're making a custom stiletto, and we're going to talk a little bit about the history of stiletto and the types of ideas I have in mind for this specific project. Some of the earliest mentions of a stiletto dagger appear in around 1530s Marozzo dagger fighting manual. And the stiletto you see there does not look very much like your typical or archetypical stiletto you would buy at an antique store right now. In fact, it tends to be a specialized stabbing dagger and is described to have two sharp edges, but not necessarily being specialized for cutting. The stiletto we see now looks more like either triangular or diamond section shank type needle dagger. They tend to be very small and have a bad reputation for being used by thieves, assassins, and prostitutes. It tends to be the case that from the way stilettos are normally ornated and designed, the bad reputation is probably ill-deserved. For the simple fact is that they're fairly fashionable daggers, and I don't think assassins and prostitutes would be the exclusive customer for a item of high fashion, so to speak. However, nonetheless, that reputation of being a sleazy weapon does come from around 1600s, so it is contemporary to the daggers being used, and I will not dispense of it altogether. The higher-end stiletto daggers with super refined design obviously indicate a discerning customer who can pay. And in this case, the stiletto I'm making has to be an original work of art by me, done in a style of either Baroque or 18th century masters. And that is my task. Stilettos, the way we see them now, reached their peak around the 18th century, although we already see them in the 16th and 17th century. However, I'm looking specifically about features of a mature style that identifies this specific dagger amongst others. The stilettos we see in museums and antique stores don't indicate the fact that they were used for any kind of dueling or battle, because they're too flimsy, too refined, and too small to participate in hand-on-hand combat. Although the customer for the current project asked for a gigantic stiletto measuring overall 22 inches. So obviously it's quite a departure from the historical piece we're talking about, although military and trench stilettos that served at the same time as bayonets tend to be about that size. However, when we look at ornate stilettos, the amount of craftsmanship that goes into them to make sure that everything is fine, smooth, thin, and fits very well with the assumed wardrobe of the intended user indicate that it was not a nobody with a file in their hut making them, but is part of a civilian garniture, something that you hide in your clothing when you walk outside, and probably intended for self-defense against all kinds of scoundrels and ruffians. I've never seen a historical Mosaic Damascus stiletto dagger or any European dagger in the medieval era. However, the client for this project asked for something more modern in terms of Damascus pattern. So what I did is I made star Damascus and cut it open using the accordion technique to expose the fine design that's within. The story for my stiletto begins in 1710, and for connoisseurs of history, especially art history, the date specifically already should indicate what I'm going to talk about next. In Italy, in 1710, a peasant was digging a well on his property, and about 20 meters or 22 yards down, he discovered the remains of a Colosseum. The Colosseum said Herculaneum. Unbeknownst to him, the farmer unleashed centuries of innovation and artistic invention from now on, and two disciplines. Later on, in approximately mid-1700s, King Charles dedicated an entire digging team to digging out the two cities, Pompeii and Herculaneum. In AD 79, Vesuvius erupted and covered both cities, with one with mud and the other one with ash. It is unknown exactly which month the Vesuvius erupted. Some sources say August, but looking at the archaeological data, seeds, fruits, so on and so forth, it looks like it was actually November, so our sources are misdating the actual event. However, that part is not important. What is important is that from the middle of the 18th century, once the artifacts started being lifted from the excavation of Pompeii and Herculaneum, it started out a fashion of Roman revivalism. One of the people working on the excavation was Johann Joachim Winckelmann, and he discovered that art history itself is its own discipline. So there is a history in the way art progresses, how previous centuries influence current work, and how current work will influence following work. He also is the grandfather of archaeology for nerds out there. Now, around the 18th century, as all that stuff was being discovered, Roman tombs started being discovered in the state that they were originally intended to be built. You see, since the collapse of the Roman Empire, all throughout the Middle Ages, Roman tombs would be disassembled and incorporated into buildings and taken apart. In fact, in the medieval era, when a farmer would discover a Roman god or an idol, often enough it would be destroyed because it would be considered bad luck. Remember, Christianity, paganism don't mix very well. So, 18th century, we start seeing Roman tombs. One of the unique features of Roman funerary architecture is that it was public art. By public art, what I mean is you're intended to stroll through the cemetery, and some tombs essentially would be built like a bench with a dining table and saying, like, if you rest here, this guy built it, please relax. So even after death, Roman citizens would favor being a service to other people. And especially in Italy, but also in Germany and England to a slightly lesser extent, this fashion of elaborate and public funerary architecture starts over again. And this brings me back to the dagger. You see, the intimate nature of the stiletto, the fact that it is not intended for dueling, but intended for close self-defense, kind of underhanded blows, very deep and personal relationship with your target, indicates kind of a pensive, meditative necessity for the design. And hence, looking at extant stilettos, they deeply replicated the designs of sleeves, fashions, whatever you have on the embroidery. So they were kind of a boudoir style weapon. And I assume the popularity of the stiletto with the thieves and brothel owners just underlines that particular element. So what I was thinking is, since the only deeply personal relationship to any event in one's life we have is to one's own death. Other people are there for it, but you're the only one who has it. Coming straight out of Heidegger, right? Now, what I decided is to replicate Italian 19th and 18th century funerary architecture in the design of the dagger itself. So immediately, I decided that the handle of the dagger would look like an angel. There are multiple super famous examples of poignant meditative images of angels on funerary architecture. A veteran viewer of this channel might have noticed that I always stress connections between cultural, religious, and other elements and the artifact we're talking about. Because everything is situated in a very specific context. The people who made the items were heavily influenced by the architecture they saw, the type of literature they read, and even the type of food they ate. And when making a historical inspired piece in modern times, it is best to look at the type of culture that produced the artifact, but also the subsequent culture that it inspired, be it cinema or literature or what have you. Now, in making my own original art, I always focus on something that is unique about this specific piece, a type of idea. However well or poorly it is fleshed out for you, you guys be the judge. When it comes to the stiletto, what I focused on is the macabre reputation it has as a life ender, as an item that is used not for dueling, not for a fair fight, but designed for an unfair one, and on the deeply personal and intimate nature of this specific object. However, at the same time, I was not making the item for an assassin or a drug dealer or a prostitute. I was making it for someone's office. And looking at the history of stilettos in general, they were very often worn by noblemen in the civilian context. Not on the field of war, not on a duel, but when they were walking the streets or sitting in the office. In fact, one of those office letter opener daggers is a great descendant of the Stiletto Dagger. And as such, it is designed to be looked at when you're alone, sorting out paperwork, when you're contemplating what your legacy will be as either a businessman, administrator, bureaucratic official, maybe a scientist, and conjoining a deadly object with a meditation on one's own death seems quite apropos. Starting out from the Murezzo manuals of the mid-1500s all the way to modern times, a notion of a deeply personal, unique, your own weapon, dagger, sword, has to have a connection with what will come after you. Something that is either passed down to your son or the member of a company that you leave behind. Something that encapsulates for you what your legacy could in fact be. Now, I started this video with talking about Joachim Winckelmann. Not only he's the grandfather of archaeology, and archaeology from his time had a long way to go. Back then they used to focus on treasures, on beautiful sculptures of vases, and would throw away all that daily life paraphernalia. Right now, archaeologists are excited when they discover a medieval sewer. Joachim Winckelmann was also the founder of art history, and he would focus on great, most beautiful objects. Right now, our historians specifically look for those tenuous stylistic connections between daily art, great art, literature, architecture. Historians look for threads that connect us all. They connect India to Rome via sculpture and spice trade. They connect Japan and 19th century France via hokusai prints. So, starting with the 18th century all the way to modern times, it is the pursuit of connections in new ways and ideas combining to produce something absolutely not thought of or seen before. That is my primary interest in making the objects that I do. Now, how well I execute them, that is not up to me to judge. It is up to the client and ultimately you, the viewer. Now, the specific request for this project was a fully engraved blade. As anyone who has hand-carved high carbon steel knows, it is quite a pain in the ass. So as soon as my blade was forged out, I deeply normalized it to make it as soft as possible. And what I had to do is basically grind it to its final shape. That way, after heat treating, all I'll have to do is hand sand it. Once the blade is ground and is as soft as technically could be, I have to start the process of laying out my design and carving it in by hand with a hammer and chisel. The difficulty of this procedure is that, unlike my other projects, I only am working on the Damascus itself. And in a subsequent video on carving Damascus and carbon migration, I will address the specific technicalities of the issue I'm having right now, which is Damascus work hardens unevenly depending on the direction of the Damascus grain. And as I'm carving, I'm having more trouble than usual with my chisels becoming blunt. In order to accomplish this task successfully, I have to accommodate my carving direction to the flow of the Damascus pattern itself. So think about it the following way. Carbon migrates along alloy banding. Forge welding Damascus is almost identical to introducing super radical alloy banding, 15 and 20, 80 CRV alloy banding. So it is easy to carve your Damascus along those grains, but since I have Mosaic, my grains are standing this way and I have to carve them like that. Think about just your usual wood chisel and carving wood along the grain versus directly into the end of a saw. It is a similar issue. Also, because carving is a physical procedure, that is, you're hammering at a piece of material, the high carbon tends to work harden on a microscopic level as I'm carving. So I also have to take my procedure a little bit slower and watch out for the sharpness of my chisels, because as soon as that chisel becomes a little bit dull, the tip snaps off and embeds itself into the material, and then the next time I cut, I hit that hardened piece of a previous chisel, and I get really mad, throw my tools on the ground, and storm off. Not really, but I come very close to that. The elements of the cage engraved on the blade are supposed to replicate the 19th century tradition of building cages around tombs. Well, the macabre history of those cages is people were actually afraid of the undead. They were afraid of burying someone while they're alive, and then the person is very upset at you, or there's an evil spirit possessing the people, because remember, 19th century and 18th century is the age of romanticism and revival of the occult, so people start believing in all that weird stuff. As a consequence, later on, H.P. Lovecraft is very much a grandchild of that system of belief. So is Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker and that ilk. Now, I incorporate an element of a human heart as realistic as I can engrave it, because the actual size of the piece is about this big, in copper, because copper will patinate red and brown very beautifully as the item continues to live on after I release it. Now, I've never seen a stiletto come with a scabbard. Doesn't mean they haven't, I just have never seen it. But the customer asked for a scabbard. So what I did, I tried to match the elements of the waning cherry blossoms that are inlaid on the blade into the scabbard itself. The blade garden pommel on the project has some inlay, and inlay is a very relaxing technique once you get a hang of it, and a very frustrating technique when you're first starting out. What I have to do is I outline what my inlaid object will look like on the blade by scratching out the shape and carve out the hollow space where the inlaid material, silver or copper, will set in. Then what I have to do to the border, I have to pry it out like that, creating almost a dovetail effect on the bottom. Then once the softer material, copper, silver, gold, what have you, is pushed in, it goes in into the dovetail and expands a little bit, locks in. After that, what I do, I take a flat chisel and slowly close that bird that I previously raised to create the dovetail, permanently trapping the object. Keep in mind, I have to be very careful with projects like these because all the precious and semi-precious and other metals that are inlaid into the blade will be there during the process of heat treating. So I cannot allow the blade to warp. I cannot allow the blade to scale up too much. I cannot allow it to be overheated, otherwise the silver will flow out. And overall, I have to be very careful because if the differences in expansion between the silver, the copper, and the steel are too large, the silver will start moving around as the blade is being heated up, allowing oxygen underneath the inlay, and the oxygen will create scale and push out the silver leaves that I so painstakingly inlaid. For the handle, instead of casting an angel out of silver, I chose to use my most favorite technique, and that is chasing repoussé. So what I did, I rolled out some silver into a sheet and soldered it, making a pipe or a tube. I filled it up with pitch, which is a combination of clay and tree sap and what other stuff is in it, and started working the silver in on itself to create a three-dimensional sculpture. In here I have to work very carefully because I cannot thin out the silver, otherwise it will burst. And I have to constantly remove the pitch, burn the rest out, anneal it or make the silver soft, put the pitch back again, put it in the pitch pot, and continue the procedure. To make the angel a little bit more pleasant in the hand, I add the caged bars around the angel, and that evens out the asymmetrical nature of the figure and turns it into kind of like one of those Italian caged handle dagger things, which all of us love, but few of us have. If you're a fan of blacksmithing or any kind of historical reconstruction, I recommend you guys to check out the Northman Guild. I'll put a link down below to their YouTube channel, with a special thanks to Soren Ullman, who I met several years ago. Before recording the video, he contacted me indicating a cool project they have reconstructing a northern medieval blacksmith shop. And it's an ongoing process where they hand forge the gates, they hand carve all the wood that goes into the building. And if you're interested, they have all kinds of raffles and cool things going on. Follow the YouTube channel because they give constant updates, certainly more constant than we do, on the projects they have. Now, when it comes to our projects, I'm glad to announce that we've launched a new line of swords, all forged. That is, every month we have to make a couple, 2 or 3 swords that are completely hand forged, all the parts are handmade, and designed for practitioners of mat cutting or HEMA martial arts. They are nice swords, they're not ultra fancy swords. However, if you're interested in buying something from us, always check out thatworks.shop because new stuff pops up almost every day. And if you're interested in placing an order for your nice first sword, or maybe not first, or maybe 100th, hit us up on Instagram or contact thatworks.shop. To accent the ephemeral nature of life and the impending death or notion thereof in this project, what I chose to borrow is the Japanese cherry blossom. You see, the cherry blossom, the way we consume the designs now, are cute and kind of pretty. The issue is they're supposed to be a testament to the fact that something that is alive and it's in full bloom is only so for a short period of time, and even the prettiest flower will scatter in the wind and die. So cherry blossoms flowing on the blade as if on the surface of the water should be a relatively well-suited poetic notion of the overall composition. To connect the angel to the cherry blossom on the blade and pommel, what I do is I make a tiny, tiny, tiny flower and I put it in the back of the angel by first riveting it on and then soldering it. That way it can't look like as if I took a handle, random handle, and put it on a pre-existing blade. Because the goal of a thought-out composition is that the theme continues from the tip to the pommel. And as a result, the cage around the angel too with the flower replicates fairly close the cage around the praying hands on the blade. One of the final touches on the handle, I decided to use the Keambu technique. It's the first time I'm experimenting with it, but it's easy enough and it looks like a lot of fun, so why not? The principle of the technique is basically heating up your base material, steel, copper, or silver in our case, till about the temperature where wood starts burning when it touches it, and then applying gold leaf with a burnisher. At that temperature, the base material grabs onto the very soft gold leaf and produces an almost chemical bond. A project such as this takes usually several months to complete, and I hope it pays off. And with any serious work of art, I prefer to work as much with my own hands as opposed to machines in order to capture the human touch, as any artwork should have. With every single one of these serious projects, as well as historical ones, what we do here at That Works is focus on culture and how it transforms the object that is being viewed as well as the viewer, and how we're all indebted to the ever-changing transformation of art, science, and literature, and ultimately culminates in where you, the viewer, are sitting and standing. We never want to forget that we have a gigantic inheritance from the centuries before, and that we take for granted up until the moment someone points out that this is it, that Thomas Aquinas, for example, is right here present in the way you think without knowing it. So please leave a comment below about a topic you really would like us to address in the next video or two.